people are different.
He loves Bakersfield.
No, Bakersfield is fantastic. It really is. Like, I go to her home ward. Well, her parents aren't there anymore. They moved away. But when I go there, they still know who I am. Like, they know what I do for my job, and the bishop calls me to go golfing. So I tease Bakersfield. The saints in Bakersfield
You
are
need to listen
phenomenal.
to him. He says there's a lot of worse places than Bakersfield. It could be Palmdale, see? Or Baker, or Barstow. Come on, there's plenty of worse.
So I do tease my wife a little bit about it, that when you turn on an episode of Cops, I don't know if you're familiar with that TV show, it's either going to be from Bakersfield or Palmdale.
Oh, Palmdale.
That's right.
Are you from Palmdale?
No, son-in-law is.
Okay.
No.
Have you been to Palmdale?
We
Yes.
have for the wedding.
Do you want to settle in Palmdale?
No.
No, we were glad to come home.
It looked a little desert.
I have a friend, to his family's credit, so the air traffic control place for LAX is in Palmdale. And so his dad worked for whatever that department is of the government, was being transferred to oversee the air traffic control out in LAX. And they're moving to Palmdale. They find out, the bishops find out they're LDS. And the stake president comes up to his dad and says, would you please be willing to move into this ward? And he looks at the stake president and he says, well, why? And they said, this poor bishop has been serving now for over a decade.
Oh my gosh.
And we just don't have anybody to replace him with. And so would you please be willing to move into this ward? And to his parents' credit, they moved into Palmdale, in that ward.
Really?
Uh-huh.
And he became bishop?
Third week in the ward, he was called to be bishop.
How many years ago was that?
I mean, a number of years ago. They've since left Palmdale. He retired from the government and he now lives in Idaho.
That sounds like something Dee would.
I know, our son-in-law's father was stake president for a while, so that's why.
Out in Palmdale? Well, ask him if he knows the Martins.
You didn't notice the Porters.
Oh, yeah, I'll ask him, yeah.
Well, we're almost exceeding our capacity. We may have to add a chair or two. Super grateful you're here. It's one of those things that it's, I just recognize. We started with great gusto and then we kind of, by accident, kind of threw things into a thing, and now that Brock's here, we really can start.
Thanks.
But tonight's the night. Tonight we're going to finish up, and I'm super grateful every one of you are here tonight. Some of you have been here the entire time. Others have joined us. Others, like Annie,
Come when we can.
I know, have been taking care of my home life while I'm here. And if you missed it, she walked in tonight, and I'm just like, you're here, sweetie, and what was the reason why?
Because I wanted to escape the crazy.
Okay, she says that and we laugh. How many of you can honestly relate to that every once in a while?
You don't think she's here to listen to you, right?
Listen to that wedding. Hey, we have another group here, okay? Can we just slide back just a little bit? We're gonna add them to the circle and then, but guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Mark, can I ask? I feel comfortable asking you.
You do. I'm glad you do. His daughters feel very comfortable with me too, I found out. I got a text the other day with, whoa, I got chewed out.
Mark, I told him, I was like, that wasn't very nice.
Hey, that's all right. I like the comfort.
So,
But they're gonna get it back.
Yeah, good.
Mark and I served in a callings together. I didn't really know Mark before that. And Mark is a little, Amberly sarcastic, is that probably a great word of describing it?
Nice.
Okay. Mark just has a strong personality, and my daughters love him for that. So normally, as a stake presidency, second Sunday is family Sunday, we don't have anything scheduled. And my daughters were looking at my calendar, and they noticed something was scheduled. What they didn't notice, it was for my second hour of church. We were setting apart a stake presidency. And so my 13-year-old daughter that you're going to meet sometime texts him, is all, what is this? An appointment on second Sunday, and it just goes on, and then hashtag be better.
Yes, I will be better.
And
I committed to her.
I smiled and I laughed and I just went, I love it that there are people in this community that my kids love and that can like help me in all of this. So that's how I'm interpreting it. So thank you, Mark.
It is great. You're welcome. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be gathered this evening in the Institute. We're grateful for President Mead and the time that he's taken. We're grateful for the teachings that he has taught through this Institute class. We pray thy Spirit be with him now as he wraps it up and finishes tonight on the last lesson. We pray thy Spirit may be here in attendance with us, that we may participate, that we may learn and grow and be able to understand the gospel more and look forward to implementing some of the things that we've learned, and pray thy Spirit to be with us, that we may be safeguarded and protected. Pray for our families while we're away. Be with and bless them, we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Last night, and so you guys know I'm basing this off of my class that I teach at BYU, and because of just our time frame, I've always been cutting and changing things, and it's been kind of hodgepodge. And so I was going to come in and talk about some of these things like government and how do we interact with government as we defend families, and I just thought, I'm going to teach what I want to teach. And it doesn't quite fit the end, but they're the few lessons, a couple of things we haven't gone over this year that I think are really important that I do want to talk about. So it may be a little bit jumpy, but you guys are used to that with me by now. And so this is how I do want to begin. Over the course of our time, and again, that's not Annie and I, that's just some random couple that I found on the internet, but it is a pretty picture of them. We've talked about this idea of partner marriage. And that we've seen within the family proclamation, it does describe different roles, but ultimately, as it's talking about husband and wife, they interact as equal partners. And so I love this idea of partnership marriage and creating that type of a marriage. And we've talked about these principles. I'm just reminding us of this so that we can connect it to something I want to share. And we've talked about a couple of things that are really important. Number one, husband and wife, in order to have a successful eternal marriage, does there have to be equality in the marriage? Yes. I hope this is not a shocker for anybody here. There has to be unity when it comes to a marriage. And this is one of those things that trying to figure out unity of two people has been an incredible growth experience. I think Annie can testify to that one. Okay. It's also this idea of complementarity. We tried to teach this idea that complementarity, there's a quality within it, but does complementarity mean the exact same? No. And we've talked about this idea that there are differences between men and women, and part of it is just we're different people. Part of it is gender, and we've talked about some of those fun things connected to it, but it's the idea of the hands. Are hands, are they the exact same? You lay them over each other? No. But yet they work together for a larger purpose. And then finally, we have talked about the importance of this interdependence, so we rely upon each other in order to create this partnership type of marriage. Well, I just want to share some things of how we can create that. Just two principles is what I want to start off with, of how we can create this type of marriage where all of these things interact to create this just happy, eternal marriage. And so just two principles, like I said, I try to cut it down. But the first one that I really want to talk about is for building a partnership marriage, for building this type of marriage. Here's principle number one. Wise preparation for marriage includes foreseeing the needs for adjustment. I mean, every one of us in here, how many of you have noticed over the course of your marriage, if you've been married, there needs to be adjustment? How many of you realize that with your spouse, you don't always see the world the exact same way? It's true. Every time I say these things, I look over at Annie, I'm expecting a comment. But I do want to show you this. This is a really interesting trend when it comes to divorce. And when it often happens, and I'm going to make a point with it in just a minute, but I just want you to look at this. These are divorce trends in Utah, and they do kind of pattern other places throughout the United States. But if you look at it, it's amazing to me that over 50% of divorces in the state of Utah happen within the first 5 years of marriage. How many of you knew that? Or we're somewhat familiar with that trend? And if you extend it down to 10 years, nearly 75% of divorces happen within the first 10 years of marriage. I mean, as I show you those statistics, just give me ideas. Why? Why do you think that would be the case? And if you don't have any thoughts, that's fine. I got you. Okay, thank you.
Maybe those are the years of the biggest adjustments. People have their, because once you get through a lot of those adjustments, the other ones that come, you're kind of used to adjusting.
Yeah, you're getting the point of what I brought up right at the beginning of that principle one, right? It connects to adjustments. I think it's fascinating. This article, I mean, it was written clear back in 1970, but the data still shows this. David Olson, Dr. David Olson, he's a Latter-day Saint who also happens to be a marriage and family therapist. He said this: one of the reasons that the marriage institution does not live up to its expectations is because of the many myths and unrealistic expectations that individuals bring into the marriage. I mean, I just want you to think about it for a moment. What are some of the unrealistic expectations that maybe you've experienced going into a marriage? Let me share one with you as we start to share. my parents, they get married. My parents got married in the 1970s. My parents were born in 1955. They get married, they go on the honeymoon, they come back from their honeymoon. First day back from the honeymoon, they're sitting on the couch, they're watching TV. As they're sitting on the couch, as they're watching TV, my dad looks over at my mom and he says, I'm hungry, I want a sandwich. And he sits there and my mom sits there. And after a minute or so, my mom looked at him and said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Do you expect me to go make that sandwich for you? And he looked and he said, well, my mom would. How do you think that turned out? You see, my dad went into the marriage, and what was kind of his myth or expectation when it came to the marriage?
Just like mom and dad.
Yeah, which my grandparents, I love them, and their marriage was incredibly traditional. After my grandpa died, my grandma called my dad and said, I need to get gas in my car. And my dad said, okay, hey, come on in, guys, get a chair. And my dad said, well, okay, Mom, go get gas in your car. And my grandma said, Greg, that's my dad, Greg, I have never filled up gas in my car. And he said, you're 80 years old. She said, I've never put gas in my car. And so, yeah, kind of the expectation of my parents is my dad thought they were going to have that type of a marriage. And Annie knows my mom. Is that how my mom rolls?
No.
No, not one bit. I mean, number one, she has kind of a different viewpoint about marriage as far as equality within it. And number two, does my mom cook?
No. Not well, at least. Love my mother-in-law.
She's not watching.
You know what? Even if my mom was here, she would totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you. Do you know the main dinner we had growing up? Ground beef, potatoes thrown in it, ketchup squirted on the top. That was dinner. Okay? We called it goulash. But the reality is this, that one of the major reasons that marriages often struggle in those first few years is because of the myths and the unrealistic expectations that we have sometimes going into a marriage. And sometimes those unrealistic, well, it says unrealistic expectations, sometimes just those expectations are different. I mean, when Annie and I got married, she's looking at me going, where are we going with this, Frank? When Annie and I got married, we're both the second of six. Our dads were called to be bishops at the same age. They were called to be in state presidencies at the same time. I thought going into our marriage that our marriage was going to be like my parents' marriage. Well, Annie thought our marriage going into the marriage was going to be like her parents' marriage. And did we have to figure things out? Okay.
So anytime you bring two people together, what's an example of a realistic expectation?
Oh. Can we talk about this? Can you hold on to that? We're going to give some examples, and then I want you to answer your own questions again, if that's okay. I think this is really fascinating. This group, you may or may not know this, there's a group of mental health counselors. The title of the group is Association of Mormon Counselors and Psychotherapists. They need to update their name to reflect what President Nelson has taught. But I want you to look at this. You get together, all these Latter-day Saints, marriage and family therapists, clinical psychologists, and they asked them, what's the number one source of conflict in a marriage? I think it's fascinating. They said 71% of these therapists said the number one problem facing LDS couples as they go into a marriage is unrealistic expectations. Just not clear expectations of what they have for each other. You'll notice, what's the second most common problem they have? Communication. I mean, the struggle sometimes as couples come together is that they get together and they're not seeing the world eye to eye and they don't know how to talk it through. And so that leads to some of the greatest problems. Number three, money management, finances. We're going to talk about that one in a moment. Decision-making, problem-solving, power struggles, and then finally sexual intimacy. And so as you look at it, the number one cause of problems within a relationship often is we see the world different, we don't know how to talk through it. And so as we use that term unrealistic expectations, sometimes it's just we see the world different and we don't know how to talk this through. And so the question is, how do we solve it? Somebody shared this with me a little while ago. This is President Nelson, his wife, his first wife and their children. Is this the way that we solve unrealistic expectations? Anybody willing to read what President Nelson said or story that he shared about his wife? Go for it, Mark.
I pay tribute to Sister Nelson, this magnificent wife and mother who has always been supportive. When people have asked her how she managed with 10 children with so little time available from her husband, She has responded with a twinkle in her eye, saying, "When I married him, I didn't expect much, so I was never disappointed."
Is that the right approach? Like, as we look at our 24-year-old over here that's not married yet, and we're saying, hey, the greatest thing that's going to resolve this expectation problem for you is just don't expect anything out of him. Is that the right way of going about this?
I'm sorry I walked in late. I'm glad. I thought Ann wrote that.
You are a doctor, right? Did you marry him before medical school or after medical school? Okay.
We almost had 10 kids, couple shy.
How many children do you have? Wow. Anybody here have more than 8 children?
We're the only
Okay. Is the blending of? Wow. And so I just want you to look at this. As we sit and talk about the struggles with marital expectations, I mean, you see over here, here are some of the things that couples sometimes don't always align with. And I think this is fascinating for me when I teach this class to young people that aren't married. And I just say, okay, let's talk about this. Socialization. How many of you think, how many of you on a Friday night at date night, you want to go hang out with a lot of friends? You want to go out with other couples? I mean, just do this. How many of you guys, Friday night, you want to go hang out with other friends, with couples together? And we're all old funny guys. That's why we're coming to an adult instinct class, okay? But it's always funny to see how some of these people, some of the students are just like, oh, well, of course we're still going to be hanging out with friends. And then the other half of the class is like, no, I get married and I'm done with other people. Like, I'm done with other people. Well, do you see the problem if you have differing expectations and you don't know how to talk those through? I mean, look at some of the other things. Recreation. Think of date night. Think of your own spouse. How many of you guys align with what you want to go do on date night? Well, how do you navigate that? I mean, even
Take turns.
even this last week, Annie and I in the car were going on date night. She was all, we don't have to always go do something fun. And I'm just like, but I want to. She's all, can't we just sit and talk? Okay. And so, I mean, just look through this and think through these things. Religious practice. Even though you look around this room, we're all Latter-day Saints. How many of you realized as you married your spouse, just because you're a Latter-day Saint, it doesn't mean that you were raised the exact same way when it came to some of these things? Like, I thought it was crazy. Annie and I got married. I walk in the house that first Monday, after we got back from the honeymoon, Annie's like all set up for family home evening. I'm just like, what's this Monday night family home evening thing? And she was all, we have to have a lesson. I'm just like, why? She assigned me the activity that night, and we went to 7-Eleven and got Slurpees. But I do just want you to think through expectations. I mean, just look at this chart here. Well, just do this for me. This is kind of fun. You guys have been married, or a lot of you have been married. Just if you were to list off the top 10 areas where a husband and wife don't always see eye to eye in the early years of marriage, what would you put on the list? Okay? Just turn to your spouse or turn to the people around you, and what would you add to that list? What are some of the common areas where spouses at the beginning just see the world different? Okay? Go ahead and go. See what you put on that list. This is my curiosity. I want to see what you put on the list.
Time management. Anybody want to study
You're just describing our marriage today.
Just saying.
Okay. I think this is always fun, especially in this setting with married couples. A lot of married couples to think this through, and you're just like, no, what has been? Let me just show you some of the most common areas of adjustment where couples may be misaligned when it comes to expectations. Any guesses on what's number 1 on the list? This was a study done by Latter-day Saint researchers. So I guess these are the number 1 areas of concern when it comes to Latter-day Saint young couples. Number 1, in-laws. Number 2, finances. Number 3, friends, physical intimacy, parenthood, and time together. How many of you are looking at the list and you're just like, I can see why those are the top, whatever they are? Yeah. I mean, as I look at it, now it's often fun when I teach these young people that we talk these through, but here's what I would like us to do. Because aside from our 24-year-old, we're not going into a marriage. A lot of us have experienced this. And you look at our situations, like some of you, how many of you are empty nesters right now? Okay, got a couple of empty nesters. How many of you have your houses kind of split? Some of your children have gotten married and moved out, and some of your kids are still at home.
Yes.
We've got the Copes over there. I mean, how many of your children have gotten married in the last 2 years?
Year, 1 year.
Okay. In the last year, how many of your
We've
children?
got two of the four.
Okay. So here's how I want us to think this through. I just want you to think of your own dynamic. I mean, for some of you, you are still pretty young newlyweds. We've got the Puries right over there, or young newlyweds in the
I'm
room.
feeling pretty good. We just made it past
Yeah, we
that
made
10
it,
years
yeah,
ago.
this-
So we like hit
It's a
that.
25% chance we're good.
Okay. Anyway, our newlyweds right over there. But I do just want you to think through this. In-laws are a struggle. They can be a struggle when you have unrealistic expectations. I mean, the reality is, what's shown often in marriage is who wants to spend more time with the in-laws, the wife or the husband? It's often the wife, and she wants to spend time with her parents, and it causes a little bit of consternation. So I want you to think, if you have children, if you've already gone through this marriage thing, how can you help your children to go through that transition?
Lock
them
them
to
out.
move away.
Tell them to move away.
In the first few years.
Yeah,
They did that. Not be too needy.
Give me
Yeah.
all the advice.
Okay. Our first married stake president that we had, we go to our first stake conference. We're a brand new newlywed couple. This is BYU stake. And so he says, okay, here's my marriage advice for you when you're done with BYU. Pull out a map, mark everywhere on that map 3,000 miles away from her family. Mark on that map everywhere 3,000 miles away from his family. Where there's overlap that you're 3,000 miles away from both, move there. Go there for the first couple of years. So you say that and we laugh at it, but what does that allow a newlywed couple to do?
I know from my oldest brother, it saved the marriage because the father wanted to still have and so it was good. They became a unit on their own and created their own marriage and their own rules.
Yeah. And even if our kids don't move 3,000 miles away, how can we allow our kids to have that experience that they're coming together? It doesn't mean that we're out of their lives. I mean, I look at our parents, they're still an important part of their life, our lives. But how do we do that? How do we create that so that maybe we're not the source of overbearance when it comes to that? When it comes to finances, how many of your parents sat down with you? Well, let me ask this. How many of you saw your parents' budget growing up? Okay, we've got 1.5 hands that are going up. How many of your parents sat down and taught you about how to budget and how to operate within a budget? We get a few hands. How many of your parents never talked to you about finances growing up? Yeah. And I mean, well, my wife's here. What was our first argument over as a married couple?
An avocado at the store.
Money and finances, right?
You guys have great memories, by the way. Like,
We do. Brock, we laugh, and some of those laughs are because we were stupid at the start of our marriage.
I can actually remember those things.
But it is. How are we helping our kids to navigate this? How many of your parents ever sat down with you and talked, hey, you're getting married. Here's how the dynamic should go with friends. Here's kind of the role of friends. They're still going to be important, but over the course of time. Like I had one of my students at BYU, and this, it kind of shocked me. Newlywed, his wife still wanted to go out on Friday night and go dancing with all of her roommates. And she wanted to go dancing with other men. Well, is that allowed? Have we helped our kids to think that through? Some are going, what? And I'm not saying right or wrong when it comes to a lot of these things, but I am never getting a Mac again. Actually, I love a Mac. I'm never using a Mac again at the church, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm trusting you. Here's a point that I really want to just make as we think through this. As we come together and as we talk about expectations, and you asked the really good question, well, what do we mean unrealistic expectations? The reality is it's just expectations that we haven't been willing to talk through. I mean, I show this to my younger students. It's really fun to have them answer these questions. Just turn and answer with your spouse or the person next to you this question, husband, wife, or both, okay? When it's time to mow the lawn, who does that, husband, wife, or both?
Husband.
What about neither?
What was that?
What about neither?
How about you hire the kid down the street, right? But it is a fascinating question. How many of you would say husband's duty? How many of you would say wife's duty? How many of you would say both? It's interesting, right? And if it's one of those things we don't align with it, I laughed. I mean, Annie, right after we moved into our first house, we were putting the edging, do you know, the cement edging? People were coming out. We just put in sod, and the guy was just like, hey, you need to cut this down a little bit so I can do it. Annie calls, how do you start a lawnmower? And I just went, what? You're like 25. But it's an interesting question, right? Expectation. Answer this one. Pair of pants needs to be hemmed. Who does it? Husband, wife, or both?
Grandma.
I'm hearing wife, I'm hearing grandma, okay?
Hired out.
Where's Mama?
My philosophy is whoever wears the pants, hems the pants, right? Right? It's really funny asking this with a little bit more mature group than I normally teach, because these young people are just like, what does it even mean to hem pants, okay? But they have strong feelings about it. You're driving, who drives? Okay, how many of your marriages it is both?
Mostly him.
Okay. This is a fascinating one. Baby. Who wakes up in the middle of the night to take care of the baby? How many of you are just like, wife? How many of you are thinking wife and you're just like, I'm not raising my hand here?
But that one has evolved. I think that one's evolved. I mean, back when we were having our children, that was my responsibility, but now my children are having children, and it's kind of like, you know, if the mother's not nursing, they take turns. It's your night, you know, so they aren't both exhausted and
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
and the reality is there's a lot of generational things with this, right? That's why it's really fun for me to just have you answer these questions. And the point that I'm trying to make is husband and wife just need to decide together. That's the point that I'm really trying to make. There's really no right or wrong answer when it comes to these things. I mean, when it's time to make dinner, who makes dinner, husband, wife, or both? Yeah, it depends on the marriage, right? How many of you in your own homes, how many of you do like to cook? So you notice hands go up. How many of you hate to cook? And it's reflected, right? Some, it's just like, we're going out. We're going out, okay? I mean, look at that one. How would you answer that question? What's women's work? What's men's work? What's both? Again, the point that I'm trying to make, and I'm probably over making the point, is the greatest source of conflict in a marriage is we just see it different. And we don't sit down to talk it through. I mean, we are very distinct people coming from very distinct backgrounds, and all of a sudden we're creating a marriage, we're creating a home. And so have we figured out how to sit down and talk those through? That's the number one source of stress in a marriage. I mean, as you look at it, oh, these are all fun ones to ask young people. A lot of them are just like, what? You have to, what's dusting? But you look at this is from a study that was done. These are the top stressors in a marriage, okay? Any shocker that economics budgeting is number one? Here's a fascinating thing for me to see in the United States, though. I recognize that there is real poverty in the United States. I fully understand that. And so I'm not commenting on that. But couples that have enough to live a very comfortable life, they're still fighting about money. Why? Differing expectations, and they don't know how to talk it through. I was just talking to somebody that I taught seminary with a little while ago, and the conversation came up, end of the month, you have 50 extra bucks. How do you spend it? And he's just like, well, I made the money, I get to choose how to spend it. How many of you that would fly in your homes? How many of you that would not fly in your homes? Okay, expectations. Do we have expectations and how to navigate it? It's always interesting to see this. For women, number two stressor in their relationship, lack of shared responsibility. The reality is this, I just read this, this is not reflected, well, it's a study about all couples within the United States, so I'm sure there were some Latter-day Saints in there. More and more families, both parents are working, right? Both husband and wife are working, and yet wife is still doing 75% of the housework. Unrealistic expectations. Guy number two, what's he frustrated about? We don't have any time. Well, why isn't she giving him any time? She's taking care of the kids and the housework and working, okay? And so, again, here's another one, just another study that was done. Instead of what's stressing us out, it's what are couples fighting over? What are the most common fights they have? Think through that in your own lives, okay? See how well you match up. Number one thing they actually fight about is household responsibilities. Money's stressing them out, but they're fighting over it because they just have differing expectations and they don't know how to work it through. Bringing up kids, I think it's interesting how it's reflective. Guy, number 3, what's stressing him out? What's he fighting about? Relatives. Remember the number one thing that differing expectations is when it comes to that. And so you can see those things. That's a sad one to me, drinking and gambling. Again, this is not a Latter-day Saint study, but it's just all couples in the United States. And so guys, the point that I really want to make is that as we come into marriages, we are different people, and that is beautiful and it is wonderful. And the number one thing that's causing so many divorces is couples just don't know how to sit down and talk those things through. And so just think of your stage of life. If you're in the stage of life that you are right in the middle of being married and you're right in the middle of raising kids, then what are you arguing about and how can you sit down and understand it from your spouse's perspective? That's huge. If you've got kids that are going into marriages or you've got kids that are coming to you and they're a little bit stressed out about these things, how are you helping them to navigate it? When they come to you and they say, Mom and Dad, your daughter just got married 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
January.
So she comes and she's all, Skippy and I are arguing. How can you help her to say, what's the expectation you guys are probably fighting about? And how can you clarify what each other needs? So that's the first principle of creating that happy home. Second one is this one here. Principle number 2 for building a partnership marriage is this. For a marriage to thrive, it must be the top earthly relationship. I really like this quote from President Nelson because it cuts it off a little bit. Let me go ahead and read it. He says, marriage brings greater possibilities for happiness than does any other human relationship. Yet, some marriages fall short of their full potential. They let their romance become rusty. Take each other for granted, allow other interests to cloud, or clouds of neglect to obscure the vision of their marriage, of what their marriage could be. Marriages would be happier if nurtured more carefully. And so here's what I'd like you to do. I just want us to do a little scripture study. We haven't done this a lot over our time together. If you have scriptures, would you just open up to them? And here's what I'd like you to do. President Nelson says more marriages would be happier if we took the time to nurture them. Would you just go ahead and read through these scriptures on your own? And as you read through them, just look for the principles that teach how to nurture a marriage.
I think I found the problem. It says a man has to leave his father and mother, but nothing about the wife leaving her father.
Okay, let's talk reality. Scriptures were written a long time ago. It's not right, but whose type of world was it 150, 200, 300, 500 years ago? Very male dominant, right? We should ask you to speak in state conference and you teach that idea. We'll see how well that goes over.
I'm not doing that. No.
You want to speak on that subject or you won't speak? That's going to change some of our future conversations.
I get up to the pulpit and the waterfalls just start happening. It's horrible. Boys can't even. It's insane.
Well,
It's okay.
it is okay. And if you're not comfortable, we'll have Annie speak.
I kind of like this reference to he.
Let me just give you another 2 minutes or so to go through those. It's so weird how we kick off every once in a while.
Yes. Because they weren't there, they don't know. Yes.
Okay, is that enough time? Just share with me, as you sat and you went through these scriptures, what are some of the principles that you're noticing? President Nelson says we don't want those marriages to be rusty. We want to nurture them. So as you went through it, what are some of the great truths that stuck out to you of what it means to nurture a marriage? Yeah.
Well, I noticed if you kept writing on through the Ephesians 1 down to 33, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. And I thought that blended both of them very nicely.
Now, let me ask you this. You guys have children?
Yes.
So if you were to sit down with your married children and have like a little family home meeting for the married children, and you were to read that verse, how would you explain it to them? What would that look like, sound like, or feel like in a marriage today to do those things? Yeah, like,
Well, a lot of them learn.
One film would go very well. Two husbands would probably not even understand it.
I mean, that's reality, right? Sometimes that's just so good. Any other principles you noticed in there of what it really means to nurture?
I like the verse, something that we've done recently in the last few years. This verse didn't mean this to me before, but I mean, it's just right in the first part. Shall be for, like, thy calling shall be for a comfort, and through afflictions and with in the spirit of meekness. And something that we've done just for like mental health's sake in general, we've just like set a plan, like when I am spiraling, you know, when I'm having a hard time or something might be difficult or triggering, like, you know my plan. This is who I need to talk to, get them on the phone for me, sort of thing. And so like this idea of just like there's a plan and like the thinking's already happened, that's been huge for the comfort part for us. And I think that like having just that plan is turned into like a sign of like nurturing that relationship.
I think that's beautiful. That just within the marriage relationship, part of nurturing is just recognizing strengths and weaknesses and days and awesome days and struggle days, and that our spouse is able to meet us where we need to be met and brings that. I think it's fascinating when you sit and you read about marriage within the scriptures, that both in Doctrine and Covenants, you can see it there in 25, when you go to Doctrine and Covenants 42. No, you're good. Talking to Joseph, it talks about that both of them are to be a comfort for their spouse, which is huge. I mean, growing up, I thought adults have life figured out. I just did. And then all of a sudden I became an adult, and I'm just like, well, I have no clue what I'm doing half the time. And so that idea of comforting one another. Thank you. What's that?
Guess that doesn't change much. I'm still figuring it out.
It gives me hope, right? It gives me hope.
Yeah, that's really a good point, though. Through your life, like when you become empty nesters, life's different. Rob retired. I want to say it again, a couple of years ago. And I thought I had expectations that have not been met, you know. And so it starts again, and you have to talk and figure it out. I thought, really? No, it's very interesting, but what you said is right. With every new baby, every career change, every calling change, every assignment, it changes, and you have to work it again.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A couple of years ago, I mean, the church and just this desire to meet needs and provide resources for people, they realized that they needed to have some marriage and family counselors, some mental health counselors for senior missionaries. Because these senior missionaries tend to be so busy in careers, they tend to be separate, and then all of a sudden they retire, and we throw them together and ship them off to a foreign land.
In a city where they are alone, and
Yeah.
can't speak the language.
They're together all day, and all of a sudden they've got to navigate again, right? But I love what you said, that part of this idea of nurturing a marriage is that we just recognize that this is reality, and that look, we're together, and even though we've been married 20 years, we've still got to keep doing this to keep our marriage from getting rusty. Right? I think one of these days I want to find out what you meant by he said he retired. Oh, please.
I think about this a lot, that even whether we're 20 or 50 or 80, we're still children to the Lord. And so we're still just figuring things out.
Yeah, it's true. That's a beautiful thought. Sometimes it's just that idea of I get overwhelmed or I get frustrated with myself. I'm just like, I'm 40.
I just had a birthday, 44.
So I'm 44 and I'm just like, I should have this figured out. And the reality is, I'm still trying to figure it out. And God's okay with that. So, oh, yeah, please.
In Doctrine and Covenants 42, it reminds me of our profession. Love thy wife with all thy heart and cleave unto her and none else. My profession was such that most of the people I worked with were women, and on any given work day, I would usually be working closely with 1 or 2 or 3 women for 8 to 10 hours of the day. And as my wife pointed out, I was usually spending more time with them than I was with her. And it was necessary for me to be almost a little bit standoffish at times and not engage in too much small talk, because I wanted to be very careful that I didn't cross that line where I started talking about my marriage and things at home and complaints and so on. And most of them were pretty good about it too, but sometimes that leaks into the conversation sort of naturally, and if you exploit that, then all of a sudden you're not cleaving to your spouse.
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea as we talk about that word, what that really looks like, and where those loyalties and thank you. Any other thoughts? I share this in my classes. I label it this way, but I just want you to think of how well you're doing with this. These are the principles that are going to help to create this, that are going to help us to have clear expectations.
You're going to have to start it again. That was the part that I messed you up.
You said it was okay.
Yeah. Not my fault.
No, but I share it with them and I say, hey, here's the newlywed starter kit. This is the kit. If you're going to start your marriage off in the right way, that's going to create a space that you can have these conversations, that's going to help you to nurture a marriage, here are some really, really good things to do based off church teachings. I just want you to see whether you've been married. Anybody here married longer than 40 years? Can I go there? Anybody? Okay, we've got some married longer than 40 years. How many of you guys are around the 20-year phase? How many of you are 10? Okay, there we go. But I just want you to look to see how you're doing with these things. Just a little mental check. Number 1, take the time to study the scriptures together. We got to be better. We need to improve. Pray together. Pray together. I mean, it's one of those things that, I have to admit, even on those days that we're frustrated with each other, you can tell by now, Annie and I are pretty passionate people. We love strong, we feel strong, okay? And we apologize strong. We apologize a lot. But there is something humbling about in that day that your marriage is getting a little rusty, a little bit frustrating when we get on our knees or when we stand together and Annie prays for me. There is something about that is healing. There is something about that causes you to be humble. Other things, try to go to the temple together. It can be hard. It really can be hard. I think any phase of life, it can be difficult. but just try to go to the temple together and worship in the temple together. Family home evening. Yeah, it was awkward. I remember coming home, like I shared that one time. I walk into the house, I just come in from the MTC teaching, and he's like, okay, time for family home evening. I'm just like, every night for you and I is family home evening. It's just us. So no, this is what we're gonna do. And it was us without TV. It was us just together. I'm just gonna keep putting them up. Oh, there you go. Weekly date. I learned this one really, really, really fast as a bishop. Any couples that came and they just shared that they were struggling, I'm grateful they trusted me to come and visit. But one of the questions I'd ask every one of them, how's your weekly date night? And every one of those couples that were struggling, they just weren't taking the time to be together, making it a priority. Counseling meetings, just sitting and planning. Sometimes they can be formal, sometimes they're just sitting, but are you connecting as a couple and just talking? And finally, just that continued courtship. When I use that, I'm not talking about necessarily the weekly date. Courtship is different, right? It's connecting with them, it's having fun with them, it's still flirting with them, it's those things. Are we keeping our marriage alive as we're doing those things? Because the reality is we want these incredibly happy homes. And they come as we just sit and as we connect and as we introduce that intimacy that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Ugh, there's more that can be said, but let's do this. Let's take our break right now. We're gonna take a 2-minute break. Stand up, go to the restroom if you need to, get a drink, and then we're gonna kind of shift gears and we're gonna jump into something that I wanna finish with. And we'll kind of wrap everything up with this one. I'm gonna go get a drink with us. Go to the restroom.
Break time, right?
Everybody stand up.
We appreciate you.
I
gotta go.
I've asked her to come. She watches them, but yeah, usually she's doing something else. So.
Are you ready to just?
That's right.
He does. He likes it over there. He loves this program he's doing.
She's almost got good
He
insight
likes being
too.
on his own,
But to have her
Well, yeah, he's
share
back
her
in.
thoughts.
Oh, he is?
It's true.
Yeah, he just went back in and he's trying to end December because he was doing the eye thing where he was trying.
How are your
And it
days?
just kind of got topsy.
How are our dates?
Days. Yeah, I'm not gonna ask about your
Say
days. We'll leave that between the two of you.
My days?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is that.
Pretty much, yeah, work at home. That's what I get to do. I mean, I've been doing that for like 16 years now, 17 years, something like that. So it's been really long. It's like that when COVID hit.
But does it make you get outside? That means you can,
Yeah, I haven't ridden since November. Yeah. But I guess it started up, I get started up again. So.
Yeah, I know. Like, what happened with all that?
All
Like,
right,
I don't understand.
we have in the past for sure. So yeah, we'll ride usually once a week together. So.
And you do 50 plus miles.
Oh yeah.
You never know when he's gonna be around again.
That's right.
I remember, like, I'm confused, you know, I was like, like, I was looking at you guys and your families thinking, I can't wait. Like, it's not even Disney fans, but more than that. And here we are learning.
Like, I felt like there's mom. And now I'm those ages where, like, and now I don't feel anymore like mature, like you guys were just so.
Yes, sir.
Everything now, I can't wait to now I'm looking at these young moms, like I still feel that same way, like I don't know what I'm doing, I don't feel like, no. So I wonder if those young moms are thinking, I'm like, oh, I have nothing figured out. But I really thought.
I didn't hear about that. They really are.
I'm doing everything.
Very sweet and nice. It was very sweet.
And I asked myself, when am I gonna be that mature? You guys.
No, we don't.
Because I still don't feel me.
See, here's how I do it.
I'm never gonna get to that level. You
I love it.
We're not amazed with you.
But
You'll be in the
I'm just
grave
like,
by the time you get that one.
And I'll be better.
Okay, guys, let's go back. Like I said, I thought we were going to lead into this big dramatic conclusion, but if we have an entire class together and we don't talk about this idea of love, I think I failed it a little bit. So I want to do that. As you look at the family proclamation and a list of principles that families are built upon, it talks about they're built upon principles of faith and prayer and repentance, forgiveness, respect, and love. And so I just want you to think this through. What does that term mean? When you hear the term love, what does it mean? How would you define love? Or even better yet, you look at somebody and you say, I love you. I mean, what do you mean when you say, I love you to somebody? I mean, there is a gazillion different ways that love's been defined. Just think of some of those definitions. I mean, if you're really struggling, think of like country music. How many different ways does country music talk about love? I mean, just try to do this for me, just with the people around you. When you say you love somebody, what does that mean? Go define it. Go explain it. Okay, do we have it figured out? No. I remember talking to a neurobiologist once, and we were just talking about this idea, and it was all, well, love is just like, it's chemicals. So I'm just like, what do you mean? It's just like adrenaline, and it's like dopamine, and it's those things. It was like, so when you tell somebody you love them, you're just like, I feel dopamine towards you, is that what you're saying? And he just smiled. I mean, we just kind of laughed at it as we were talking it through. But it's really kind of a fascinating thing trying to come up with that definition of what it means to love. I mean, anybody nail that down? I want us to talk about love. If we're going to be talking about eternal families, and if we're going to be talking about how love is a foundational thing, I want to finish by talking about this idea of love through a gospel framework. And so here are 3 things that I really want us to talk about as we wrap up. Number 1, I really do want us to talk about how love is an agentic verb, okay? I want you to think of this idea of an agentic verb, and I know that's kind of a big phrase and things like that, but you guys know what a verb is. A verb is it's an action, right? An agentic is connected to agency. I also want to talk about this idea that love is a process and also love is other-centered. I mean, it's one of these things as we talk about this idea that love, true love is an agentic verb, that admittedly we live in a world that often confuses love for attraction. I mean, think of Disney. Disney is the epitome of confusing love for attraction, right? Disney talks about this idea of love at first sight. Well, are you really falling in love with somebody when you first see them? No, you're attracted to them, right? But the reality is, from a psychology side, it's important that we understand this. Many people don't realize that the raw attraction is more instinctive. Feelings of love are created by your own thoughts, words, and actions. That's psychology right there. It's not necessarily gospel. I mean, it's incredibly complicated as we think through. Even attraction is incredibly complicated. I mean, we live in a world right now that often when we talk about attraction, we talk about attraction to a certain sex, right? But attraction is even more than that. I mean, the reality is, how many of you that are attracted to men are attracted to every single man that you see? Right? Or how many of you that are attracted to women are attracted to every single woman that you see? You see, attraction's pretty complicated. How many of you over the course of, you met somebody, if you've been married for a long time, think back to when you were single, you met somebody, you thought they were cute, but over the course of the time in your relationship with them, they became a lot more attractive to you. How many of you have had that? Or maybe we should focus on our 24-year-old here. Have you ever met somebody that you first saw them and you're just like, wow, and then you got to know them and your attraction waned? Okay, right? So attraction is a lot more raw when it comes to those things. But I want you to see this because, again, often our thoughts, words, and actions is what love is based off of. What are the thoughts that we're thinking about somebody? What are the words that we're saying about somebody? And you'll notice something about every one of those things. Those are things that we control. You see, the point that I really want to make is if we could just fall in love, kind of that idea within society, you're just kind of, you fall in love, you have no control over it. What does that also mean? You can fall out of love and you don't have any control over it. You see, if we view love in those terms, think of the Savior's commandment. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love. If you can't control who you love, then you can't really have any agency whether or not you obey the commandment. You see, the point that I really want to make from a gospel framework, love is not necessarily something we do feel it, but ultimately it's that line. Love is agentic. Love is something that we choose. I mean, as you look at it, I love how President Kimball, who was just one to always just speak direct and candid to the point, he said this: what is love? Many people think of it as mere physical attraction, and they casually speak of falling in love and love at first sight. This may be Hollywood's version and the interpretation of those who write love songs and love fiction. True love is not wrapped in such flimsy material. How many of you can hear President Kimball saying this in kind of that raspy voice? He said, there must be great devotion and companionship. Those are choices. Those are things that we can control. He goes on and he says, love is cleanliness and progress and sacrifice and selflessness. This kind of love never tires nor wanes, but lives through sickness and sorrow, poverty and privation, accomplishment and disappointment, time and eternity. Jason Carroll's an author that I really like. He's a professor of marriage and family studies at BYU. And he gave a devotional. If you haven't listened to his devotional, it was back in 2019. You can see the title here, As I Have Loved You, Agency-Based Love in Dating and Marriage. It's really, really, really good. And he taught this. He said, in modern day Revelation, we see that the word love appears 5 times in the proclamation on the family. And each time it is linked with action words such as to love and care, or to love and serve. Thus, the language of the Lord suggests that love falls within the scope of our agency. Love is something we do, something we can control, and ultimately something we can choose. If not, God could not command us to love one another. I mean, let's just look at the family proclamation. This is just the one paragraph where we see love stated 3 times. And I want you to see, as we read through it, how love is connected to a verb that we can control. It says, husband and wife have a solemn responsibility to love and care. I mean, when you think through that, how do I know that I really love someone? Well, I choose to care about them. I mean, when I think about my family experience growing up, one of the ways that I knew my parents loved me is they cared for me. I mean, my mom may be horrible at cooking food, and that's fine, but my mom rocked it when you were sick. Like when you were sick in my house, that was the greatest thing ever. Mom made the bed, she rented all the videos when you had to go to the store and get the videos, she bought whatever treat you wanted. She just sat there and she cared for you all day long.
I heard that.
I think the entire room did. Annie's mom did care. Just when you were sick, very different approach. How did your mom deal with being sick?
My mom would be like, go in your room, and when you feel better, come out. And so when I got married, he acted like the biggest baby. Oh,
Go to your room,
goodness.
Brian.
Yeah.
When you feel better, come out.
Hey, answer this though. Do you like being sick when I'm
Oh,
around?
heck yeah, it's wonderful.
Because I learned from my mom.
I'm trying more, but it's really like, just not still in
Different
me. It's
though,
like,
right?
go to your room and feel better.
It's like all the time. My kids would slow school every day.
Well, we would, and we would ask her, can we be sick today? And she'd be like, yeah. And it was awesome to she recognized mental health, okay, that we needed those days. But the point that I'm trying to make, one of the ways that we show that we love is that we do acts of caring. We care for that person. It goes on and it says in the proclamation, children are inherited to the Lord. Parents have a sacred duty to rear their children in love and righteousness. Now, often as we use that term righteousness, we use it as kind of an adjective, right? It's describing something. But I want you to imagine righteousness is a verb. I mean, just think this through. A verb is something you do. How do you do righteousness? Yeah. And it's one of those things that within a gospel framework, one of the ways that we show that we love is that we're righteous. I mean, that's a very different way. If you think about the law of chastity, it's a very different way of understanding the law of chastity. I mean, when I think about it in the context of us, why do I keep the law of chastity? Why do I fulfill that commandment of righteousness? Because I love her. It's a reflection of my love to her. It goes on, and it also says this, love and righteousness, to provide for their physical and spiritual needs, and to teach them to love and serve. One of the ways that you know that you love someone is that you serve them. I had a mission companion that was awesome. Every day he woke up and he ironed my shirt. Just every day, that's what he did for 3 months together. He woke up every single day. Our wake up time was at 6:30. He'd wake up at 6 o'clock and he'd iron my shirt. That's just what he did. And I mean, we're 19-year-old kids. We're not going to look at each other and be like, I love you, Elder Hunt. And he's like, I love you too. I mean, that's just not us, right? But I knew that he loved me because he served me. I mean, there are lots of other verbs that we could put here. I mean, just think through this on your own for a moment. If you were to try to create a list of 5 verbs that's not here in the proclamation, that you would say are different ways that we show that we love, just think through for a moment. Let me give you a minute. What are some of the other verbs you would add to the list? You can either think through it in the way that you look at your own kids, and you look at your own spouse, or you can think of your spouse, and how do you know that your spouse loves you? What are they doing to show that? Okay, let me just give you a moment to think that one through. And just start to share. What are some of the verbs that you'd put on the list that are examples of verbs that show love? We've got serve, we've got care, we've got righteousness. What else? What?
Provide.
I've never thought of that one, but I agree.
Honor.
Honor. Beautiful. What other ones would you put on that list?
Compromise with, I mean, willing to adjust,
Yeah.
like we've been talking about earlier.
It's one of those things that we feel strongly about things, right? And often we feel strongly about things because we've seen the positive benefit of those things. But being willing to say, okay, help me to understand your side of it. And instead of it's like me or it's you, like I'm going to get what I want or you're going to get what you want, we're going to find something that may even be better than what we thought. And so I do love that.
I haven't thought of tolerate. It's a little bit funny, but you don't leave them because they have it. You learn to tolerate, and that's not compromise.
Okay.
Tolerate.
It's true. Okay, moment of just raw honesty. I recognize some of you have family members, some of you don't. How many of you have a family member that one of their traits drives you a little bit crazy? Just raise your hands. The Stones are the only one over there just like, everything about Jessica is perfect, and everything about Tyler is lovely.
We gotta figure it out.
But it is true, like, there are certain things, like one of the beautiful things about Annie is over the course of our marriage, she said, hey, here is something that you need to be better at. And she's been willing to share. And there are certain things that you just learn to tolerate because you love them. Like, I didn't know that I chewed funny until I married Annie.
Tolerate it very well.
You have not taught him yet.
I try, Mark.
Mark, you may or may not know this. There is a real psychological disorder. I'm not making this up. I'm really not. There is a real psychological disorder that you struggle with how other people chew. Annie, can your dad be in the same room with people when they're chewing if he's not chewing at the same time? No. Wow. It's real. That's real. I'm not making this up, okay? But I do love that verb. I think there's truth to it, and it doesn't mean that we're accepting poor behavior, but there are certain things about our spouses that maybe we can tolerate them, tolerate their chewing, or tolerate their snoring, or tolerate their driving, or whatever it may be. Okay. Any other verbs you'd put on the list that have come to mind?
For me,
Kira's things that I should improve upon, and I give her plenty of opportunities to always be teaching. So,
Yeah. You think of a role of a teacher. A teacher is a dispenser of knowledge. I know that sometimes in education it seems like that's the role of a teacher. I just stand up and I tell my students this. But real teaching, are they learning? Are they understanding? Am I letting them rework it? And so it's beautiful. You look over the course of a relationship, you even look over the course of a family. One of my favorite phrases that I ever saw, it was a Jewish rabbi, he had a sign, it was, "My father, my teacher." And he just realized that for him as a father, within his Jewish faith, it was his most important responsibility was to be a teacher to his children, which I think is a beautiful idea. You think of like first Nephi, Nephi having been born of goodly parents, and then we often skip this part. Nephi then goes and lists all the ways that his parents have taught him. And we kind of miss that in the book of Mormon, or at least I have over the course of the life. So we know that we love each other because we're ready to teach each other. That's a great one. This is just my curiosity still going. Any other verbs that came to mind that you started to think here?
I kind of think, like in our family, especially like with my mom, like one way we show our love is through trusting. So you like, I don't know, it's kind of like you have to put away your pride to trust someone enough to like tell them things about you or talk to them about things and know that they're not going to judge you for it and they're going to love you and talk it through with you, and just that trusting of, I'm telling you this and I know you're just going to love me.
That's awesome. I mean, it really is a beautiful. Thank you. Any just last ones you want to add to that list? Okay. Something I was thinking about over the last couple of weeks is I've just been thinking this idea of love is something we can control. And the impression that came to me is one of the greatest things that I can do as a father, or one of the greatest things I can do as a husband, is to pray and ask my Heavenly Father, what type of love do my kids or what type of love does my spouse need right now? I mean, in a world that we live in where we just think that love is a feeling, I mean, love is something you control, it's something you do. And I really do think a very loving heavenly parent, or one of the best things we can do as parents, or one of the best things we can do as spouses, or one of the best things we can do as a daughter towards our family is to think, well, what does my family need as far as love right now? What does this person need? And I love it. I mean, you mentioned trust, that sometimes that's hard in a relationship, right? But maybe in that moment, what our child or what our spouse really needs is our trust. They're coming to us saying, do you know what, I don't know why I'm feeling this, and I know you're not even going to agree with me, but can you just trust me when it comes to that? And maybe that's how we're showing love. In other moments, they come in and it's just, how do they need to be loved in that moment? They need to be cared for. At a moment, I don't even know if I've shared this with Annie, that our youngest daughter once, she did something she shouldn't have. She actually spoke to Annie in a way that she shouldn't have. And she's off in her room, and I hear it. I walk in the door as I hear my daughter saying this, and my blood just boils. It's just boiling, and I send her off to her room, and then I start stomping down the hallway, and I'm going to let her know what she said to her mom was wrong. And it was just this overwhelming spiritual experience. Don't do it. And I just stopped. I mean, I was at her door. Don't do it. And it was that impression, this is what she needs right now. And so even though she did something wrong, I walked in the room, I scooped her up. We just sat on her bed, and she just started sobbing. I know I shouldn't have said that. She knew what she had done was wrong. And if I would have come in and lit her up how I was thinking that I should have as a dad, like, respect your mother. And so I think one of the most powerful things that we can do with love is to think through, what does our spouse need? What does our family need?
That's where the righteous part comes in. I keep thinking how perfectly written that is with the care and the service and the righteousness. Everything just falls under that beautiful umbrella, you know?
Yeah, I love that idea. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so that point that I want to make is, in a world where we're told that love all the time is an emotion, when we live in a world where we're told that love is something we can't control, the reality is, in the gospel framework, we control everything when it comes to love. Just the other two, we're going to wrap together pretty quick as I just look at the time. I want us to talk through this idea that true love is a process, not other-centered. I really like this quote from Elder Ashton. Elder Ashton is one of those, how many of you remember Marvin J. Ashton? How many of you have zero memory of Marvin J. Ashton? He died in probably like 1994, 95, right? Right around the time the proclamation was coming out. He was very tender-hearted. As I've gone back and as I've read a lot of the things that he wrote, he's often speaking of love or marriage and relationships, and he's very tender-hearted in how he approaches it. And I think it's important what he says, just that first sentence. True love is a process. And how many of you have realized this? Love takes time. And the beauty of it, if it's a process, love deepens over the course of time. We live in a world where it's often like immediate gratification. He even talks about it. Let me go on and say this, or just read it. Sorry that it's cutting it off. Let me look at it here. It says, true love requires personal action. Again, it's a verb, right? Love must be continuing to be real. Love takes time. Too often, expediency, infatuation, stimulation, persuasion, or lust are mistaken for love. How hollow, how empty if our love is no deeper than the arousal of momentary feelings or the expression of words of what is no more lasting than the time it takes to speak them. I think that's one of the most beautiful messages that we can learn, one of the most beautiful messages we can help our family and our children learn. That love deepens and it gets better. There are certain aspects of marriage that of course are going to change over time. Some of the things connected to, well, I look at it like, I still remember holding Annie's hand for the very first time. How many of you remember holding that significant other's hand for the first time? Exciting, magical, right? Now Annie and I still hold hands. Do we still feel the same way? No, kind of that excitement is gone. Well, okay, anyway. It's a different feeling, but it's still love and it's better. I can remember the first time Annie and I kissed. I mean, that was fun and exciting. And even though the excitement of the kiss goes down over the course of time, it's not the same magic of the first time. Love deepens. And our children need to see that. One other point that I want to make is just this. It's that true love is focused on others. Richard Turley, Richard Turley came to BYU. He gave this devotional titled "The True Love." He said a lot of things that we said, but I want to come down to this part. He says, no, the kind of true love I'm talking about today is not something that we chase. Rather, it is something that we choose. Again, that idea of love is agentic. We can choose it using the divine gift of agency. Anyone, regardless of physical appearance, emotional appeal, or marital status, can have this true love, which I think is fascinating, right? And look at what he says it means to have true love. It has two components. A selfless attitude, and B, a selfless action. We live in a world, and we say we live in a world, I think it's always been this way. Love, when you think of the language of love, it's always about the individual's experience with it. I feel love, I fell into love, it's all about me and I, right? When the reality from Elder Turley, what is he saying? If we really love, it's focused on another. It's focused on another and what we do. And I think that's one of the beautiful things. That as we focus on the needs of another, and in a marriage relationship like we're talking about now, as they focus on our needs, what happens to our needs as we focus on the needs of each other? There's beauty. There's beauty. It doesn't mean that we neglect our own needs. I mean, we need to be very careful in what we are saying. But true love is focused on another. And so, I just want you to think through this. When we look at somebody and we say, I love you, what are we really saying in a gospel framework? I mean, just think that through. It's more one of those rhetorical questions. But as we just finish our time together, I want you to think what that really means. In a gospel framework, you're looking at somebody, and when you say, I love you, you're looking at them and you're saying, I choose you. I choose to care for you. I choose to serve you. I choose to look for your needs. I choose to tolerate. I love that word. I don't know why I love that one so much, but I choose to tolerate you. I choose to seek to comfort you. I choose to provide for you. I choose to nurture you. That's what we're saying. When we look at somebody and say, I love you, we're not saying I feel dopamine over you. Even though dopamine's involved in these relationships. I mean, we're talking about really complex things like attraction and love, and they are complex. But the one thing that I do know, and the one thing that makes family beautiful within a gospel framework, is it teaches us to be so unselfish. And it teaches us to be so kind. and it teaches us to look out and to care for somebody else. And it teaches us to choose someone and to remain true to those covenants. It's one of those things that I get it, that family is complicated. Family is just complicated. And yet it can be complicatedly beautiful within God's framework. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
That's it, guys. We're done.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll start anew. If you missed it, I said that President Griffiths is probably going to start like Book of Mormon yodeling. This is cowboy poetry.
Cowboy poetry.
That's going to be President Griffiths cowboy poetry. Well, that's it. Sweetie, can I call on you to say a closing prayer, and we'll kind of wrap things up.
Opportunity we had to tonight and to learn how to strengthen our marriages. Please bless us that as we go home, that we can take the things that we felt here and the ideas that we've had, and that we can go and care more and love more our families and our spouses and those around us. We're so grateful for President Meade and for all that he had shared with us over this course of 8 weeks. And I say these things in the name of my beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. President Meade.
Yeah.
Hey, can I actually show something? Can I show one more thing?
You should say
Oh, I can't show it if it's not on a PowerPoint. Can I just show something like a? I've got a website up. How do I show it? I'm going to move it to my second screen.
Yep, that's what you're.
Okay, this is totally unrelated to the class, and yet many of us come thinking about this. Somebody showed me this website, and I love it. How many of you have read the book from Elder and Sister Hafen, Faith is Not Blind? It's a beautiful book where it's taking on just complexity in this world that we live in. And somebody showed me this website today. If you're not familiar with it, I love it. It's just titled faithisnotblind.org. And often on the internet, we find a lot of websites where people share frustrations about the church, or they share frustrations and things about, and they'll share their story maybe becoming inactive in the church. This website is designed for people to tell stories who have struggled with faith. Many of them have left faith and then found their way back to faith. And it's really awesome to see just a lot of their things that are here. I mean, as you click on,
What is it, Brian?
faithisnotblind.org.
Do you not have internet?
I did. Let me click on this really quickly. Let's see if we can bring it back.
Church internet.
Hell.
It's been blocked.
No, I was on it earlier today. I was clicking on it here. But if you click on it, if you go to About, let's see if my internet kicked back in.
I don't.
We're going to see if it'll come up. Oh, yeah, as you click on it, it tells you kind of about it. Here you can share your story. Another thing, podcasts. I think this is what I was looking for. I was looking at it earlier today. Oh, goodness. Anyway, internet's not working. It's a website that I've absolutely loved just clicking through today and hearing some of these incredible stories. And so if that's a resource that you want to go to, I notice they have an Instagram channel that you can follow them on Instagram if you're on social media. But it's just a really kind of a fun website if you're interested in that type of thing.
Thank you,
Yep.
President. Thank you.
Okay, guys, go have a wonderful night. That's all I wanted to share, but it's an awesome resource. It's an awesome resource. If you don't mind stacking your chairs, stack your chairs.